folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone so you can stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And as I've continued to traverse the musical landscape of our country, it's become evident to me that there are pockets of authenticity that still exist. Maybe not at the level they once did when you had regional sounds in New Orleans and Chicago, Detroit, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, LA. There's no doubt there's been a homogenization of sound, but certain pockets of this country, and I would include the desert rock bastion of Tucson, and also the incubator known as the borough of Brooklyn, seems to be at least two places where there's pulse and there's tension and release, and there's opportunities to create new musical vocabulary on and off the bandstand pre-COVID. And I get a chance today to speak to a guy who really likes to get his hands into like 9 different cookie jars, and we just came in leading with a tune called Yuma, which really harken back to, it sounds like Armando Peraza and Mongo Santamaria with Cal Jader a little bit, that dancing clave, and that's just a little bit of a taste of this cat who's been around and continues to paint on his palette. Arthur Vint, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you, my man. I mean, were you looking for that Afro-Caribbean flavor on that tune?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And actually, so that's not one of my songs. That is a debut of a song that my band recorded just a couple of months ago, and I just finished up just yesterday, actually. So I was kind of excited to have an opportunity and a platform to play that because no one's heard it yet.
Oh wow! This is Maiden Voyage.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's a cover. It's a song, the soundtrack from the 1957 film 3:10 to Yuma, which was recently redone.
Damn.
But the original is pretty great. You know, it's an old black and white western, and the original song has lyrics, and it takes place in Yuma, Arizona. And being a native of Tucson, my uncle lives in Yuma and works out there. The song kind of just, spoke to me in some way. But the original is a very slow kind of ballad, Western ballad, and I kind of updated it to have more of a Afro-Cuban beat to it. It starts out kind of as a what gringos would call a rumba, but it's probably more more realistically called a bolero rhythm, and then it goes into a cha-cha-cha for the piano solo, and then into mambo section during the violin solo. So it goes through a couple different Cuban styles.
It's fascinating that you. I'm glad you said it was originally like a more of a Western ballad type tune, because you did a great job of making that feel, not necessarily sound, because modern recording is something we can get into, but you had the feel of that George Shearing, Cal Jader, Armando Peraza bounce from the late 50s, which is unbelievable. I mean, the fact that it came out in 57, that's exactly what Cal was doing in that time period. It's really quite, that might have just been serendipity, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you can check out the original. It's on YouTube. I think it was sung by Frankie Lane. It's kind of like a crooner back in the 50s.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to. I mean, how do you? Let me ask you a question, Arthur. Like, how do you, as an arranger, composer, like, just take us through this one, or any example of taking a tune that was performed in one genre, and then how to reconstruct it so that it swings into a completely other genre.
Well, I mean, as jazz musicians have always tried to do that. There have always been covers, and even what jazz musicians refer to as the Great American Songbook, being songs from old Broadway shows, and then So it's just kind of being in that tradition. But, I play all kinds of different music. As primarily a drummer, I work mainly as a sideman, playing in other people's bands and play all different styles of music. So I play lots of jazz, straight ahead jazz, some early jazz from the 1920s, they call like hot jazz. I play a bunch of country bands, rock and roll bands, singer-songwriters. And then I had a great opportunity when I was going to school. I got my master's degree in music at the Manhattan School of Music. And while I was there, I played in the Afro-Cuban Jazz Orchestra, which was led by the great Bobby Sanabria, who's an amazing percussionist and educator. And
I haven't actually talked to him yet.
Oh, he's amazing.
Yeah,
he would be
man.
a blast to have on your show, too, because he is so knowledgeable about the history of the music and everything. But so he was, a kind of teacher and mentor to me, and so that's where I really learned how to do the Latin thing. So, I play all these different styles of music, and Latin music or Afro-Cuban music was relative for me, something that I learned. I graduated in 2013, so the 2 years I was there, I played in that band, and we were actually recorded an album that was called Que Viva Harlem, which was really great, and I played drums on that. But then I also learned how to play all the different percussion. So on that track that we started out with, we recorded it live in the studio in Brooklyn on October 1st.
What studio?
This past year. I do a lot of work at this place called The Bunker studio in Brooklyn. Wow. It's a beautiful studio in Williamsburg.
So is it kind of like you can, it's just a space that you can rent, or it was actually somebody overseeing you in the production of it?
It's led by two guys, Aaron and John, and then they have staff engineers, and they just have a day rate.
Sure.
And you come in and you rent the studio you get 10 hours, so we're there from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I've done a bunch of sessions here, my own and on other people's records, and I feel really comfortable there. And they have a lot of great mics, and it's a huge vaulted ceilings, and everything's made out of natural wood, and it's a really comfortable setting to be in. But we recorded the main tracks for that, like I said, back in October. The five-piece band being Gabe Terciano on violin, Luca Benedetti on guitar, Danny Fox on piano, Russell Hall playing bass, and I was playing drums. So we recorded a whole album, and then on the 310 to Yuma track that you just heard, I have been in Arizona, in Tucson, for the last 2 weeks now, escaping the
we're
COVID
both.
crisis.
I just want to be very clear, like to the audience that's going to hear this later or listening now. Arthur and I are literally probably a few miles apart, but because of coronavirus, we have to do this over the phone, which is a tragedy because I'd love to have you in the studio. But anyway, that's where we're at. So continue. Yeah,
but I've been recording. I've had a lot of time, and I've been overdubbing other percussion parts. So like all the, I overdubbed Wiro part, maracas, clave, bongo bell, bongos, and conga, and some other little sound effects. So that was all done after the fact, overdubbed. So I made my own little percussion section for that, which gave it more of an authentic feeling.
The truth is that studio rates were not as high in the 60s and in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and quite honestly, if you were a prolific arranger and or producer, guys like Mike Mainieri, and they'd have all access to these places at night. So oftentimes they'd bring in like all the studio cats to play and jam, and those eventually turned into records. And the point I'm getting at is that everybody hit in the same room at the same time. And I get you have chops and feel and that you can do it all yourself, but would your preferred mode of recording be like to have a timbalero and to have congas and bongos? The point is, you listen back to those early like Al McKibben records, or on Fantasy or Mongo records. There's like 12 or 15 personnel on there, And I just wonder if that's what you ideally would like to do in this age
Oh, yeah.
in this age of overdubbing, and if you've done that in other records.
Oh, I would absolutely love to just do it all live.
Right.
But the way records are made now, I'm putting up all the money up front. So that's, you're talking about having to pay 4 other guys to come down. So it's a cost-effective thing too to do it myself. But I have
Absolutely. And
played,
just to
like
be
when I said,
clear, I mean, in the past, the record company would have provided that money for the artist. It's not the
yeah.
responsibility of the artist to do that. But anyway, that's the realities of our time.
Right, and I do have a record company that releases my albums, which I'm grateful for. Rope-a-Dope Records out of Philadelphia.
Rope-a-dope.
Yeah, great label, and they've been around since I think 2001. They've put out tons of great records. Antebellum's Afrobeat Orchestra. They did a Medeski Martin Wood record. The Tin Hat Trio was on Rope-a-Dope. Lots of bands that I listened to a lot in some formative years of mine. So, I'm really happy to be represented by them. But the economic climate of the music business, they basically just do that. They represent me. They're not putting any money up front to record. They have very little money to promote. It's more of, being associated with these other great artists that are on their label. And, they do a good job of trying to create a sense of community among everybody. But, it's tough, too, because we're not all the artists are in the same place. They have artists now all over the country, and they have a back catalog, and they have new artists that are coming out. They try to put out, several new releases a month. So it's
Well, let me ask you a question. I mean, when you, so it's about name recognition. There are other cats on the label, so I mean it's worth it to be part of that collective. But as far as like when you press an album, I just remember hearkening back to my interview with Brian Jackson, who worked with Gil Scott-Heron, and they did that song "The Bottle." Are you hip to that tune on Strata East? It's more of like I don't know. It was a really amazing tune called "The Bottle," and they couldn't. It was so popular. It was a record label run by jazz musicians. They couldn't make enough copies to get out enough pressings for people. It was so in demand, and they lost a lot of money because of it. But does the company like produce vinyl for you so you can bring it to merch tables? Like, what else besides the attachment to other names do they bring to the table?
Well, Rope-a-Dope has a relationship with disc makers, which is also based out of Philadelphia, and they manufacture LPs and CDs. So you get like a discounted rate, like a group rate from Rope-a-Dope. But, again, that's the artist is putting that up, and you'll see online, I'm sure you see it all the time, people running these Indiegogo or Kickstarter campaigns trying to raise funds to
Sure.
make a record, because it's expensive, because you have the studio costs, you have the musician costs, you have any licensing costs if you're playing covers of other people's music, and then artwork costs, production costs, and promotion costs. And all said and done, you're looking at 15 or 20 grand on the moderate
That's so
scale.
wrong.
Of
Yeah,
things.
I do.
Yeah, and big companies used to be able to invest in smaller artists. David Byrne's book, fantastic book, How Music Works. He talks about this. How the only reason he was ever given a contract by Warner Brothers is because Warner Brothers had all these other huge artists who were making them a lot of money, and they were then able to invest in unknown artists like Talking Heads. Like Talking Heads were a gamble for Warner Brothers, but they had, I forget what other artists they had in the 70s, like in the late 70s, but people who were
Oh my
a lot of
God! It was
records,
like
and then
they had James Taylor and freaking
Sure.
I mean, the other idea is just like, I guarantee you that, I mean, if it was a no name first time deal, maybe not so much, but I mean, blood, sweat, and tears post David Clayton Thomas. I mean, they had RCA rented out for 2 weeks at a time, bowls of cocaine. I mean, they had plenty of opportunity to marinate in there for as long. And you know what? The companies knew that they could even put those guys on tour and write it off as a loss because they'd make so much off the record. And, it's really profound and somewhat perverted to think that there is almost. I remember talking to the late great Neil Casal, and I saw him last summer, and he said, anybody who's making any kind of, seeking or anyone who's making music that we're making, whatever that means, isn't getting ahead. And it's like really, in order to get ahead, you got to wear about 9 different hats, and you have to be really good at a lot of different things, which I know you are. But I think the life of the musician in this time, just the musician part of it, is humbling for me because I don't know if society views it as a real profession.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not. We're not essential workers. If
I would disagree, but I know what you're saying. Yeah, I dig. That's a very good point. You're not essential.
But you brought up Neil Casal, and one of the hats he wore was as producer. And I actually got to work with him a year ago on a record.
Really?
And we actually had that was also recorded at Bunker, and that was for Zephaniah O'Hora, who's a great country songwriter, singer-songwriter that I worked with in Brooklyn. So he brought Neil on to produce his most recent record that's coming out this summer. And he had a Kickstarter, but it was a very successful Kickstarter. I think he raised about $25,000, which all went into the record.
Right.
He rented out 4 days at the Bunker. I could only afford to do 1 day for my record. But it was great to stretch out and really just get to dig in and focus on one song for 4 hours and have Neil there with us to direct us and give us some ideas. And we came in with our idea of how the songs were going to work, and then Neil said, what if we tried this? And we had that time afforded by the 4 days in the studio where it didn't feel like the clock was ticking.
Oh, man, that is nerve-wracking.
So
yeah.
We could investigate.
No, I dig that.
It's going to be a great record, Not to say that the record I just did with my band feels rushed. I think we approached it in a different way, where I spent a lot of time preparing for the 1 day, knowing that it was going to be, kind of rushed feeling, but I didn't want the arrangements to be rushed. So I had been doing a monthly residency with my band at a great club in Brooklyn called Barbez.
Barbez, yeah. No, I love that place, dude. I saw the Allison Wilson there with the violinist and badass trio there. Great. You had a residency there, Arthur Vint residency. Sick.
Yeah, and I mean it's still going on. We don't know if
it's up in the air.
Survive this being closed right now. I actually just donated to their. If anyone's listening knows about this place, they have like a GoFundMe trying to raise their rent. I think they pay $25,000 a month to rent their space.
That's insane.
So, anyways, but Barbez is this great venue in Brooklyn. Yeah. They've been around for about 18 years, and so I've had a monthly residency there for the last year and a half, leading up to this record. And so, I figured out who I wanted in the band. We, I had a bunch of different people playing with me, and we kind of locked in a good lineup. Locked in some arrangements. I was writing a bunch also. Yuma being the only cover on the record. I did the other 11 tracks are all originals, but really workshopping them, playing them live. So then when we came into the studio, we already knew what we were doing, versus the experience with Neil producing, where these were new songs that Zeph had written, and he wasn't really playing them out live yet. because he was still promoting his last record, playing his old record, so kind of keeping him under his hat, coming in, and we'd figured out in the studio how the songs were going to breathe and exist. So just two different styles of recording, you know.
Yeah.
Also, mine is an instrumental jazz record, and his is a singer-songwriter record. But,
yeah, I mean, that's much more in Neely's hip pocket, although, I mean, it was just so great to see him getting out there and being you know, in his own way, trying to channel Gabor Szabo and, you know, the rock artists and the Circles Around the Sun contingent. But was there anything nuanced thing that he did that you will always carry around in your toolbox that was effective in terms? Because, I mean, I remember talking to Aaron Magner from the Disco Biscuits, and he was just like, you know, a producer can sometimes be the psychologist of the moment, you know, where they have to sort of assuage certain people. It's more of a mentally focused thing than anything else. Is there something that you took away? Because, you know, Neil was I mean, he was a great session player. He was a great singer and live performer, but you don't hear about his producer chops all the time.
Yeah, well, so when we first started talking to each other, we had a couple really long phone conversations, and we were just really talking about records that we liked and drum sounds that we liked. And so he would send me these lists of albums to check out, and I would send him stuff that I liked and wanted him to check out and see, what do you think of the tom sound on this?
I love it.
What do you think of the snare sound on this? And it was really cool to have someone like that who could dig into the kind of details and be able to talk on the same level as me and understand like how important that is to the sound of a record. And you know, Zeph's music is you know, it's kind of retro. You know, his first record is very much in the kind of like 60s classic country and idiom, and his record that we just did that we did last year with Neil was, you know, more of a 70s record. So, but none of us really wanted to say that.
Well, let me ask you a question. I couldn't ask a better guy. So, in your mind, classic 60s country, that's not the Byrds. That's who would you analogize to that? Like, what kind of record would be?
Well, I mean, the Byrds and Graham Parsons are one aspect of it, you know, but that's West Coast country.
And it's also psychedelic folk kind of thing. So when you say classic country,
but, you know,
what?
60s,
Yeah.
60s Nashville stuff, you know, early Merle Haggard.
Got it.
And,
early Haggard.
And, you know, some of the crooners even, like Eddie Arnold, that's more like late 50s, early 60s. But
and then the 70s is like the Rowan Brothers, or like, I mean, what's
it just got a little bit more electrified in the 70s, you know. All the amps got bigger, and you started having people who maybe grew up listening to the Beatles playing country music, you know. So there was that influence. And so Zeph's new record felt more like a 70s record. So we went in and tried to get more of the 70s. Meant for me was I went and I outfitted my drums with the coated black dot heads, which in the early 70s they were the brand new heads that everyone had in their studio. They're a clear head that have a coating on top of this black dot that kind of dampen the sound. And people make fun of it now. They're like, oh, in the 70s all the toms sounded like cardboard or something because they're so dead.
Yeah,
but
I dig this a lot.
It's kind of a cool sound, and you know, if you're making a record that everything else sounds kind of classic, and then your drum sound is super modern, there's a disconnect there. So, you know, I really tried to tune the drums to fit into that setting.
Why do people?
So
why did you just articulate something that is so clear now to me, that was so unclear before, which was I have a very hard time, not across the board, with modern recorded music, no matter what genre. And I think it's because of what you just said. And I mean, this just blew my brain open. If you're looking for a retro sound, why are you using a modern drum sound? It's not going to work.
Right. Well, and everything is so processed now also.
Oh, God. Unbelievable.
Or you rarely hear real drums on any modern music. It's usually
A machine.
because I teach a lot of drum students, and I try to get the kids involved and keep them engaged. So I say, okay, what's your favorite song? And then they'll give me an example, some weird percussion samples that's been completely like changed settings, and how I would pick a song that I could drum part for it, but there are no drums on pop music. So then I just say, you know what, let's just learn this Led Zeppelin song or this Beatles song or something, and kind of just force them to eat their vegetables.
Yeah, or I mean, like, because, freaking Pete LaRocca or Mickey Roker, man. I mean, throw that on.
Yeah, once they're a little bit more advanced.
What is it? So what is it? Tell me, it's so great to talk to Arthur Vint on the Jake Feinberg show. Such a high honor. McCutcheon was speaking very highly of you, and I'm just so glad that we were able to finally connect. But I mean, what is it about? I guess as a drummer, I couldn't ask a better person about how you have incorporated the nuances of feathering the bass drum and keeping time on the cymbals, using the bass drum for rebound within more rock, formulaic rock settings, pop rock settings, and how that can break up the music. Because you listen back to the early 70s, which is my favorite period. I mean, I don't think there was a bad record made between like 71 and 73. It was just an incredible time of human music. And obviously, like the more like electronic, stuff. You had Donald Byrd playing with Barry White's rhythm section. It was just nasty. The whole thing was just filth. And so many of those drummers grew up as post-bop or bebop players originally. And they brought a lot of that nuanced drumming into rock. And I wanted to get your philosophy on how you like to break up time and form and create space within straight music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Jim Keltner also comes to mind as the great rock session drummer who was a jazz drummer first and always wanted to be a jazz drummer. And part of what makes him so great is his dynamics and his color choices and the way that he can approach a standard rock groove and give it more depth, So I try to do that myself. I think that you can approach a regular straight ahead 4/4 groove, and if you think about how hard you're hitting everything and add some dynamics, you can add layers of depth to it and just make it more interesting than just bashing on it. And John Bonham, for how hard he had some pretty great dynamics and great control of his hands and feet. And the stuff that he played was basically Max Roach vocabulary or early Roy Haynes vocabulary, just kind of played on bigger drums.
Really?
Lower drums.
Really?
Well, if you listen to
that's really a ballsy
like,
I mean, I'm not disagreeing. I mean, I don't listen to a lot of Bonham. I just didn't think you were going to go there. I mean, Roach and Haynes.
Oh, Bonham's great.
Shit,
but like the last little drum solo at the end of Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
Like it's like a Max Roach solo. It's just played on Max Roach would play on 14, 12, 14, 18. I'm sorry, like a 12, 14, 18 kit with a regular snare. And Bonham was playing on like a 14-inch rack tom and an 18-inch floor tom and a 26-inch kit.
Yeah, I did.
But if you write it out, it's the same notes. It's just how it ended up sounding and how he, it's orchestration is a little bit different, but it's the same notes, it's the same stuff. So I always try to find connections between things like that and see what I can incorporate.
Well, I mean, it's just important with your students, and even now, I mean, it's harder because you're doing it over Zoom or whatnot. But the thing is that um, Johnny Vidakovich, who's a dear friend, Keltner's a dear friend of mine. Actually, Larry Klein, the bass player, called Keltner the Elvin Jones of rock, which is a great nickname. And you know, Vidakovich, Eddie Marshall, Haynes comes to mind, Papa Joe. I mean, those guys. You know, your rhythm is how you walk. It's how you know, and you're a sonic mirror of that, and that's your heartbeat. But the fact is that a lot of your younger students have been growing up with quantized rhythm jammed into their ears for the last 2 decades. And they're playing machine parts, as we talked about. How do you get them to stop sitting on their balls and actually let them to play themselves, to like be themselves and follow their heartbeat? What is the Vint manifesto when it relates to that? Because these cats are playing, I mean, it's so quantized, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a great skill to have, to be able to play rock solid time like that. I mean, I think but it can lack humanity, or, you know, human
Exactly.
touch. So I mean, I teach a lot of young kids, and it is a stress to just get them to play with a metronome. They're a little too human right now, to be honest. So,
you don't want it to be sloppy. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't want it to be sloppy, but I want people to be able to feel the time, you know, play through the time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I mean, I've been doing some remote recording here, in Tucson for some bands that I play with back in New York. We've been kind of emailing parts back and forth to each other since we have all this time, and so I've done 4 recording projects, and I don't usually get to see the wave when I'm recording. You know, I'm in the booth, I'm behind the drums. So now that I'm doing it all myself, I can see the waveforms, and it's a very strange thing that versus when you used to record to tape. You know, you can't see where your beat lines up with the bars or with the metronome. So I'm looking at my waveforms now. Yesterday I was recording drums for this song in collaboration with some guys back in Brooklyn, and I'm looking at where my notes are falling with the bars on the computer screen. You understand what I'm saying? It's like you can look at I'm using on Pro Tools, right?
Yeah.
So I noticed that, like, during certain parts of the song, I'm like playing on top of the beat. Like, my waveforms are hitting before the actual click. And in other ones, they fall back right on to the click, you know?
Sure.
And like, there's a push and pull that is, you know, and then I'm getting kind of self-conscious about it. I'm like, oh, what is this? Kind of weird, because I'm looking at it. But if you just sit back and listen to it, it sounds natural and it sounds fine, you know?
So what's the lesson in that?
You know,
I mean, the lesson, go ahead.
The lesson is, I think, probably if you were to look at great drummers and you were to line them up on a grid, they're probably not going to be playing on a grid. Some of them might be, you know, I don't know, maybe Steve Gadd would play on a grid. But
right.
Like, I think that there's the human, you know, it's not that it's rushing per se, but that sometimes you play on top of the beat, sometimes you lay back, sometimes you play right on, and it depends on the part of the song. You know, usually you could say, like, you're going to lay back a little bit on the verse and then push a little bit on the chorus, or push a little bit on the intro and then settle back in. You know, things like that now that I'm looking at it on a screen, I'm like, I'm just taking note of it, you know.
Right,
I guess it's not good or bad, but but it is a little interesting.
No, what's cool is that you probably are. This is something you probably would not have had time to do in normal life, but now you're immersed in this quarantine, and you're able to focus on things that are a little bit more. Well, I mean, everybody has that sort of, you know. That's what I love so much about the music that I listen to, is every drummer had their own inner time feel. And, you know, Garibaldi told me, he's like, man, I could be playing at the On Broadway or something, and somebody come up to me and say, hey, man, you played your ass off. You sounded just like so-and-so, and he'd want to slit his wrists. You know, the last thing you wanted was to be compared to another drummer. And we again are in this time again. I opened the show talking about the authenticity of Brooklyn, and I do notice a lot of individual cats and people doing their own thing, and trying to have their own feel. And I know that's going on, but that was prevalent at a certain time. And we live in this time now where we're saturated with material, and it's more about comping and conforming. Just because, I mean, let's put it this way: Carlos Santana did not even have a record out when they got invited to Woodstock. That was just a lucky break because Bill Graham gave the promoter 2 analog cassettes. I don't know the other band, and the guy chose Carlos Santana. And you know what happened? That got televised, and Latin rock was introduced to the East Coast. As far as I'm concerned, it was only Machito and Tito. You know, you had salsa music, but you didn't have and so that sort of fear, that ability within the music industry or business at that time to be able to say, oh yeah, this band has no product, but we're going to take a chance on them. That opportunity was there to break through. And today it's like, if you're doing something different, I mean, it's really hard, or doing something holistic or creative, especially if you don't want to make something that is, and you're never going to make a hit anyway if you're trying to make a hit. But I just wonder, in your life, when you decided in your own work that you were just going to be yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've found a way to make a living playing music, which is amazing. And sometimes I do have to, I'm not being myself, I'm playing a part. But, you know, for the albums that I record and that I invest in on my own, then, you know, I'm definitely thinking more about how do I want to present myself to the world, or what is this? This is my one opportunity to be myself, make my own music. No, you know, there's not anyone else telling me what to do. I'm calling the shots. And, you know, I tried to be true to my Southwestern roots. You know, I grew up listening to Calexico here and
Sure.
Other great local bands, and that kind of all fall under that desert rock thing, which, you know, I don't know if you were to have to write it down, what it is. You know, it's maybe a lot of songs that are in A minor, and maybe some kind of surf guitar, influenced a little bit by Ennio Morricone or something like. But it whatever it does, it feels authentic to Tucson to me. And in New York, I was definitely the only one playing any kind of music like that. You know,
That's awesome, dude. No, I'm the Long Island cat, and I'm so proud of you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, but not that I'm like trying to copy anyone's style, but, you know, I took a few elements of that and said, okay, I'm going to run with this, and then took a few other elements of other things, you know, because some of my songs are more just straight ahead jazz. Some of them are more modern jazz. Some of them are more Western. Some of them have a backbeat and are kind of more of a pop song. You know, I just kind of, I'm taking from things that I like from everywhere, because, you know, I consider myself a musical egalitarian. Everything's equal. And, you know, even now I have a Afro-Cuban song, which is cool. So trying to just take stuff that I like and present it in my own way, you know, because like you were saying, how David Garibaldi, you know, was upset that someone told him that he sounded exactly like someone else, you know, because no one wants to hear that, right? But if you steal enough stuff from enough different people and you reassemble it, then it's going to be totally new, you know. So I think that's kind of has been my secret, is I'm borrowing or stealing stuff from so many different sources that when I reassemble it all, it's hopefully doesn't seem like anything else, you know.
Well, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this in for you, and we'll come back and break it down.
Cool.
Spiritual thing is basically when you're playing, and it's just not bebop. This is other music too, but bebop in jazz is probably, that's the high end of what we do as jazz musicians. But just the spirituality comes from it's like something. Now this may sound abstract, but it's something that Wayne Shorter said to me one time. He said that the only way you can really, really, really play is that you have to go to the store and buy some milk for your grandmother. You know, and when he said that to me and the drummer, Omar Hakim, now he had a few drinks, we were all drinking.
Right.
I said, wow. But a couple days later it hit me, you know, because, you know, it's like to come, if you have one of those kind of families, you go to see your grandmother, she says, go to the store and get me some milk, and you go there, there's a love, there's a love for something other than just what you're looking at. It's like your own personal love, which could come from God, which could come from the force of life. It could be whatever it is that you think makes you tick. Mm-hmm. That if you tap into that, whatever that is, it's not a material. It's not the instrument. It's not the notes. It's the life force. And that is very, when you operate on that band, that's or on that frequency in life, that is very spiritual.
All right, Mr. Arthur Vint, you want to take a guess at who that is?
Is that John Patitucci?
Oh, it's a great guess. It's same instrument. That was my interview from September 2014 with Stanley Clark.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
And you know, Arthur, you just spoke very eloquently about borrowing and stealing from all your people you look up to, and then turning it into your own thing. You know, and it's going to sound different, and that takes a lot of attention to detail, discipline, and focus. But I really want you to talk about the idea of when you get to a point when you can get on the bandstand and forget everything you know and just let it flow through you from the heavens. And if you could talk about a band you were in that played live where that kind of manifested.
Wow. Well, I remember when I first started getting into jazz, that feeling was like a drug. That feeling of just kind of letting go and, you know, playing whatever I was feeling in the moment and being totally in the moment. And it was like an addicting feeling. The problem for me, though, was that I started recording some of these sessions where I thought I was
oh,
really
no, don't do that, dude.
to the fullest extent. And I listened back and I realized it was being pretty self-indulgent on my part. And it was not serving the music. It was a little self-serving, a little masturbatory. And that's when I kind of realized, you know, as a drummer, we are 95% of the time playing a supporting role. And, you know, it was kind of, I feel like that's kind of when I grew up a little bit, when I realized, you know, it's not all about losing myself. Even on some of these great classic jazz recordings of Philly Joe Jones playing with the Miles Davis Quintet, Philly Joe is playing a groove. Mm-hmm. You know, he's interacting with soloists and he takes his solos, but a lot of it is there's like some military precision to what he's doing. Sure. And a certain aspect of repetitiveness where he locks into something and it's just swinging, and it's less about, you know, hey, look at me, I'm expressing myself, and more about I'm serving a purpose. I'm a pillar of the rhythm section, you know, piano, bass, and drums. We're backing up the soloist and supporting them. And so it was kind of sad for me because
I want to go back to something. You felt it was self-indulgent to record the sessions, or you thought you were wanking it in too much language on the drum kit? And did you actually get feedback from your peers that you were doing that stuff, or were you just being self-critical?
No, the recording was not self-indulgent. It was listening back and hearing myself play in a self-indulgent way.
I guess my question is, did the band get off on it? I mean, did they were like, yo, you're too much language, or did they? I mean, I guess to me, it's like that's just. I mean, it's fine. You can think about whatever you want about it. If people were letting me know that I was being overly talkative on the kit, then then that would make it self-indulgent. But to do it,
Yeah. Well, it's like if things.
I want to hear
are
those
happening to the
tapes,
point
dude.
where other things get sacrificed. I mean, they're pretty fun to listen to. Honestly, I think I still have a few from high school, and that's when I really wanted to become a jazz drummer, when I was really first getting into it. And but I was sacrificing some really basic elements of music, which are time and groove. And if a drummer,
I dig,
and you're not grooving, it doesn't matter how many fancy things you're doing. And so it's actually been a battle for me to get back to that point of and that's but that's the journey for me now. Like I don't think I've actually gotten back to the feeling I had when I was like 16 years old of pure expression, because I have one foot now set in reality of like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm serving the music and I'm keeping good time and I'm making the music. So hopefully I have a long career ahead of me. So if by the time I'm 40 or 50, maybe I can get back to that free feeling of pure self-expression or something. But I don't know. Like that's just my own kind of personal battle, if you will.
Yeah. No, this is an existential thing, and I'm curious if you. You're saying you tamped that down in high school, or did you actually were able to play in a band like an Nwandishi band where everybody was? It was my whole show for 9 years has been, seven when I found my voice. It's pure expression. You're talking about things being, I want to get called for the next gig. I don't want to be obnoxious. You have one foot in that reality world, but was there a time when reality and pure expression manifested in a group with you? And what was that? More importantly, how euphoric was that?
Well, let me think of an example. Here's an interesting memory. So when I first moved to the city, I used to busk in Central Park.
So sick.
For like eight hours, and I would be playing with these trios where it would be saxophone, bass, and drums, and then occasionally we would do like two saxes, and we would just be playing for so long that by the end of the day, I would be in that state.
Yeah,
I really would. Yeah. I would be in this where like I felt like I could play anything, because I was warmed up, but I was also completely exhausted and slightly out of my mind from possible heat stroke and
just exhaustion. No, fatigue is when that takes over, man. It's when you leave your body.
But having but that was addictive too, because we were going out every day. I mean, we were paying our bills doing it, so there was that. New York is tough because it's so expensive to live there that you have to make a lot of compromises. Just to make a living, it's hard to be a true there unless you're, loaded.
Well, and also, I mean, let's be clear, busking, is a good way to make cash.
Yeah, so we'd make, a couple $100 a man out there, but we'd be working these crazy hours, and we'd have to wake up. Someone would have to claim the spot, because the spots in Central Park are, there's some coveted spots. Like I remember there's a great one by the entrance to the Central Park Zoo, and another really good one by the Columbus statue, Columbus Circle. That was a great spot, but you have to get there at like 7 a.m. And we wouldn't start playing till 10. So
you just set up for 3 hours. You get some coffee and
you get some coffee, but not a large, because you can't leave to go pee. So
you just an espresso shot or something. Yeah, I did.
Right. Yeah. And you sit there and read. I remember we'd take turns and who would get the spot. So you get there at 7 in the morning, and then we usually start playing around 10. And we'd play till probably 6, sometimes 7. But yeah, by the end of the day, it was so free. We were just playing standards, just playing tunes.
But then you leave the head of the tune, though, and then you'd improvise.
Yeah, and then that was also the very first time that I was ever really expected to play extended drum solos, because what they would do is
I need video.
haven't thought
Where's
about
the
this
video of
before.
this stuff, man? This is unreal.
Well, there is some video. of it.
Arthur,
But
we
what
got to
they do
break
is,
some of this
you know,
out. This
you'd
is
wait
epic.
towards the end of a mini set. We play these like mini 3-song sets based on who was around, you know, and so we'd play like something to catch their attention, do a little ballad, and then we'd play something like fast and loud.
Yeah.
And then I would be expected to play a really long drum solo while they went around and and got money off of everyone.
Oh,
and we'd call that part the hustle. We'd hustle people down.
Oh man, dude, the hustle. I love this, man.
If they were there for 2 songs, we figured they should pay a couple bucks.
Absolutely.
So I play with these great saxophone players, Greg Ward, the second, who's now living in Chicago, and Igor Lumpert, and this other guy, Ocean Jewel, all great saxophone players. And I play with these guys, and we have a good crowd, and look for me and say, "Time for the hustle," and that would mean extended drum solo.
Oh man!
Wait for the next, group of unassuming.
Yeah, you got to put the hustle on again. No, I mean, this is so you. But I mean, this was like you were doing like Ginger Baker, Buddy Rich, like fusing all. You're doing 20-minute solos while they go around to people.
Well,
I mean,
maybe not 20 minutes, but more like 5 solos.
And so you had. So the point was that that was the first time you had. So you had to come up with interesting rhythmic patterns that didn't become repetitive, right?
With only a snare drum and a bass drum, because I was taking my Subway kit.
Wait, you had a mod kit? You had a mod kit?
Well, I used to have this little kit. Actually, a friend from Tucson, Sam Egan, makes drums out here. He has a drum company called Landmark Drum Company.
What?
And
I can't believe you're in Tucson right now. This is insane.
Yeah. But when I first moved to New York back in 2007, 2008, I asked Sam, I said, "Hey, man, I'm going to need a kit to take on the Subway," because I had my regular kit, but it was, a 4-piece kit, and it was like, you got to throw it in your trunk. You can't haul it up and down the stairs. So he does a bass drum. It's like a 12 by 16-inch bass drum, and then a couple little toms, and it all fit on a cart. And so that's the cart I would roll into Central Park, claim the spot, set up, and then I'd have to play these extended drum solos. Usually it was just a snare and a bass drum, because the toms were, although they were small, they were heavy. So I would just
No, this is the question. This is a really, I want it because this is actually this is leading right into this. Harold Jones, you know that drummer for Tony Bennett, and was Count Basie's drummer for a long time. And
sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I did a couple interviews with him, and he said to me, Dinah Washington owned a club on the south side of Chicago. I was in the house band there. I played McKee's Show Lounge in the Pershing. And he said, this is the part, he said, playing in different bands and different kinds of rooms, you learn how to play with volume according to what you were hearing. I always had to do mine physically and acoustically. And what he meant by that was, back then they were playing through antiquated PA systems. And maybe, the first few rows of it was not the sound systems that we have today. And the point was that he had to generate volume physically and acoustically. And I can't imagine you had a lot of, output in that situation. So you had to do the same thing in terms of, no one's going to worry about you bashing. It wasn't like you had a whole cymbal rack or anything. But how have you, in those situations, learned how to, play with volume physically and acoustically instead of having to rely on technology?
Yeah. Well, when you play outside, the sound kind of just disappears. So that's a tough one, and it was really hard on the bass players and saxophone players. So I would have to just make sure I was playing under them, because a bass player, you couldn't bring an amp to Central Park. They would actually have these little people going around golf carts giving tickets.
Oh my!
To anyone who had an amplifier.
They were amp. They were the amp Nazis.
Exactly.
Unbelievable, dude.
Oh God, I have so many stories about this. It could be a whole.
This is
it
the
could be a whole
greatest.
show on
This is
just
one of
one.
the greatest stories I've ever heard in 1,500 interviews, man. I love it.
Yeah. Well, no, I had this friend Ian Dewar who would play. He's a guitar player. He would have a little guitar amp, but we would hide underneath, like shirts, and sometimes we'd put the amp in a bush, right? But if he saw one of the carts coming out, he would really quickly unplug the guitar, throw it in the bush, and just play acoustic and smile at him. And as soon as they drove past, he would plug the guitar back in.
Oh my
God,
God, dude!
The bush was making sound.
Dude, as far as
Anyway,
I'm concerned, this stuff is probably. I mean, not today, but it's still going on. I mean, these same kind of tricks of the trade, man. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I hope so. But but I had to play under the bass players there because their fingers were bleeding. My friend Sam Trapchak, after 8 hours of playing, they were just black and green, and he had all these blisters, and it was insane. So I learned to play to the volume of the band you're playing with, because even though I could have played a lot louder, I had to play to match the ensemble. And the same is true even when I'm playing in small clubs where there are amplified instruments. I'm not. You don't volume because you don't want to start a battle where everyone starts turning up, and then before you know it, you're just blasting, and you can't even play with any subtlety. We're talking earlier about trying to play, backbeat music, country or rock,
Exactly.
with
Right.
some jazz, some some subtleties, some nuance. Once the stick starts being a foot off the drum, you've lost it all. And you can't get colors out of cymbals and stuff. So, and I've played in some pretty big halls too. I tour with this band called Postmodern Jukebox, and we play 1,500 to 3,500 seat theaters depending on where we are. So I remember playing in the Hammersmith Apollo in London. We did 2 nights back to back.
Wow.
Sold out, like 3,500 people. Yeah. The biggest crowd I've ever played to, which is why I bring it up.
That's beautiful.
Because it's cool. But, but also I remember being in this room and playing, and the drums were mic'd there, so that was freeing in the sense, I don't have to play to the back of the room. Some drummers will say, you want to play to the back of the room. You want to play so the person in the last seat can hear you. But you're going to sacrifice subtlety and nuance if you're doing that. So even in a big space, if you're amplified, don't change the way you play. And I always tell the monitor guy, bring down my monitor. Sometimes I just unplug my monitor on a big stage because it just starts this, this kind of like sound battle where if the monitor is blaring, but I have to play louder to hear myself, or I have to start getting myself in the monitor, which seems crazy because the drums are right there. So why would I need amplified drums coming at me?
Exactly.
So I prefer to just keep the stage volume down, everyone play a normal volume, and then, if you have a good sound guy in the front of house, they can make it sound natural and
with the Hammerstein. So how did that work out?
It was great. We were touring with our own front of house sound guy, and he was this guy Levi, I forget his last name. Whatever. He was a really great guy. He'd worked with Genesis and Phil Collins. He's been doing it for ages, so he really knew what he was doing. And he'd been in a lot of these venues we were playing also. But I would show up and we would do a drum sound check before everyone else came on stage for about 20 minutes every day. Even though everything was set up the same way. I'd come on, we'd check everything. I'd play, and he'd kind of make it fit the room, and then the rest of the band would come on, and we'd finish our sound check. But we always started with a drum.
Oh, that's cool.
And make sure that it was, sounding good in whatever space we were in that day.
Yeah, because it's so interesting, the lack of dynamics in modern music. You talked about before, but almost no modern music has, I forget the term you used, but human drummers. It's mainly machine parts, and as a result, the loss of dynamics, you've lost the ability. I mean, Bernard Purdy told me, he's like, dude, every hit we made, the song had dynamics. And so,
Yeah.
and what he was talking about was that he said drummers, because you walk into certain venues that with music and the sound war has started before the first note, so they're up at 10, decibel 10, and it never changes. I can't handle that kind of stuff. And to me, a lot of it has to do with, it sounds to me like you're more somebody who craves to make sure that you have the full environment, that you can hear the full environment. And that, like the idea of in-stage, in-ear monitors. Have you ever used those? I mean, maybe because you got to sing for your supper and you got to it's a big paying gig and you got to take it. But by and large, I've heard a lot of great drummers. I've interviewed a lot of younger cats, and they really want to hear how they're concerned about how they sound, as opposed to really just hearing they're caught up in their own insecurity, ego, and they wear these in-ear monitors. And I just wonder, I don't think that's, because you lose all that room environment. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that. As far as like, have there times that you've wanted to use them, had to use them, never used them? Where do you come on in on that?
I used them once for one tour because we were playing with backing tracks, and like pre-recorded synth tracks that were coming through. So it was a necessity, but I can tell you it was a real drag.
It was a drag. Sounds like a drag, dude.
Well, I didn't have the custom molded ones. I had these generic in-ear monitors, which were really uncomfortable, and they were really loud. And so after a 2-hour gig, it felt like my ears were bleeding, because they were hurting physically from this uncomfortable thing stuck in my ear, and B, it was so loud so I could hear the backing tracks. And then, I couldn't hear the other musicians on stage. I was just getting the track, and it was a weird experience. Yeah, just like totally strange, but great paying gig.
Right. And that was the one and only time. That's the only time you've done it.
Yeah, like I said, I prefer just stage sounds, like not even monitors if I can help it. Like, maybe some bass and piano, or guitar if they're way on the other side, and lead vocal, because if I'm playing with vocalists, I'm playing to the vocalist.
Absolutely, dude.
I'm listening to how they phrase. I'm especially in country music where all these songs, they're telling stories, and I want to hear what's going on myself. If I can't hear the lyrics, then I'm just back there playing a shuffle groove for 3.5 minutes, and that's not really that exciting, So, to be involved.
Dude, you're like the Mickey Roker of rock music. Dude, it's like, please tell me a good Austin McCutcheon story.
Oh, well, so, Austin and I listened to his interview on your show, which was fun.
Yeah. He doesn't like talking about himself,
but
yeah, I know. He's out there now, yeah.
But he was my very first roommate in New York. I was moving to New York, didn't know anyone there. I was going to school there, but I didn't know anyone, so I was looking for a roommate, and I just kind of mentioned to some people around town here. I mentioned to Hans Hutchinson, who's a guitar player in Tucson. Really nice guitar player, has a really great band. And
yeah, dude, I saw him one time. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I just had a flash.
Oh, yeah, you should check him out.
Yeah, I just had a flash.
He plays around town. For sure.
Yeah.
But, so, it was the summer before I was moving to New York, and I was hanging with Hans, and I said, yeah, I still haven't found a place to live in New York yet. I'm moving there in like 3 weeks. I guess I'll just have to figure it out, planning on going on Craigslist or something. And he said, you know what, my brother is moving out of this place, and it's a great place. It's like right off the Morgan stop in the L train. His room's super cool. It has this like balcony that goes out. You can see the Empire State Building on it. And he lives with this musician, this guy, I don't know much about him, but might be good for you. So his brother, Evan, I called him up and he said, oh, thanks. He was like, because he had to find someone to fill
Right. He didn't want to leave Austin in the lurch. Yeah, right.
So I took over his lease, and I remember Austin had just gotten back from recording this first EP in Philadelphia with Jason Laughlin, and we were hanging out, and like the second night I was there, he was playing me the rough mixes from that, and that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I don't know. But we started playing music shortly thereafter. I started playing in his band.
Did you guys? What was the band you were in together?
He had a couple bands. He'd just kind of make up goofy band names. We were in this one band called the Velvet Bone Breakers.
Right. I know. I also heard about another one called the Neckbeard Telecasters. I'm not sure if you were in that one.
Neckbeard. I sat in with Neckbeard Telecaster a couple times.
I love that you sat in with Neckbeard, dude. That's unbelievable.
Yeah,
that is so cool. This is warming my heart right now, dude. Unreal.
Yeah, I played a gig with him probably back in 2008 or 2009 at Union Pool. But then Austin, he split town for a while and was in Mendocino County trimming.
Right. Yeah.
Then he came back.
Yeah.
Came back to New York for a while. We were doing this residency at Skinny Dennis, playing tunes, and the stories. I don't think they're really safe for radio.
You know what? I wanted to get the chronology. Did you play with Margot Valiente there?
I know Margot, and I play with a lot of people in her band. I never actually played with her band because she was going out with her drummer. So when you're dating the drummer, you don't really get called to. You don't?
No, because I saw her. This was a while ago, though. Because I saw Marvin Sewell with her, and I saw Scott Kohlberg with her, and Robin McMillan on drums. You know Robin?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, but this was
Robin and I.
Go ahead.
We play with a lot of the same people, and then Scott is a bass player, friend of mine who I lived with for many years, and actually Austin, Scott, and I were roommates for a while.
That must have been anarchy there.
Yeah, we got into some.
You guys are just the three freaks in there. It's unreal. You have no idea what to expect.
We had this backyard too when we were living together, which is kind of unheard of for Brooklyn.
Oh my God.
And we would throw these huge parties and have these giant bonfires in the backyard and grill all this meat. And I think we put some concerts on in the basement and stuff. But Scott's now the bass player for Calexico.
I saw him.
He's been Calexico for about 3 years now.
Yeah, no, I've seen him in a variety of settings, and then, but yeah, like everything else, everything just sort of shifted into neutral. I saw him in New York for this Winter Jazz Fest, and he was. We were checking out this guy, amazing bass player. I saw him, and he mentioned that he was ready to go on the road with Calexico, but obviously that's on hold. Arthur, I would love to do a part 2 with you. I don't know how long. Are you planning on being here until there's a vaccine, or what's your plan?
Well, yeah. My wife and I can't go back to work until things normalize in New York. Because I also bartend at the Village Vanguard, which is something we.
Whoa, Vint, dude. Dude, we got to do a part 2 next week, man.
Okay.
Let's do it.
When the Vanguard reopens, that's when we're headed back. But that's probably not going to be till May or June. So we'll see.
Dude, I am so humbled to have connected with you, man, and you articulated a lot of things today that are not easy to necessarily verbalize. And I had a ball, man. We'll do it again next week.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
All right, dude. Yeah. I'll get this up later, and we'll be in touch.
Cool. Stay healthy.
Yeah, you too, man. Peace.
Bye.
Yep. As the world turns, Arthur Vint. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you later.